An intermediate fly line is a line that sinks slowly over the full length of the line. It gets down deeper in the water column, and in most situations the fish are often down deeper. It's a finer diameter line, so it's much easier to cast if there's wind. It's a lot easier to punch it into the wind, and even if you've got a crosswind, because it has less diameter in it, it is much easier to cast in windy situations. On the box of most intermediate lines, you'll often see 1 to 2 IPS. Now, IPS means the number of inches per second that the line sinks at. And most typically with an intermediate line, a 1 to 2 inches per second sink rate is what you usually get out of them. So you can count the line down to the depth that you think the fish are at, or that you know the fish are at, simply by knowing it's sinking at 2 inches per second. You can count that line down. Now, a couple of other things come into play there. It depends a little bit on the length of your leader. They've normally got clear tips on them, so you would be fishing a shorter leader, and the weight of the fly also will affect the sink rate, obviously. Current, other things can come into it, but generally speaking, 1 to 2 inches per second is the way they will sink. They are less visible, as I've mentioned. They've normally got a clear tip, and even the running section is a finer diameter, and it's not normally a bright colour like you have with some other lines, so less visible to the fish. It's easier to keep tight on your fly because, again, it depends a little bit on the weight of your fly, but you don't tend to have that belly that you can have from sink tips and other lines, where the sink tip may be at a slightly different angle to the floating line. An intermediate line tends to sink more uniformly, so it is easier to keep tight on your fly. The downside of an intermediate line is they are much harder to pick up. You can't pick up and recast quickly with an intermediate line. You've got to strip the line most of the way back until you get to your tip section before you can recast. So that's the downside to an intermediate. There is, however, an easy way, or an easier way of recasting. When you strip your line back, if you do a roll cast to aerialise your line, then do your back cast and shoot it, you can certainly pick up much more easily doing that, but we'll get into that when we get into our casting section further into the course. So an intermediate line is a great all-round to have in the boat or in your kit when you're fly fishing.